Welcome back, gamers. Today we are going to delve into the artisan world of crafting. As always, there is not a ton of available information about the artisan system, so for these 8 crafting professions, I will do my best to talk about everything that we do know about them, and then speculate about some things that we don't know about them. So without wasting more time, let's dug in. We will start off by talking about mechanics applicable to all of our crafting professions. Crafting will be oriented around recipes that can be acquired through a multitude of different ways, some of which may be through vendors, mob drops, questline progression rewards, and deconstructing equipment pieces. These recipes can then be permanently learned and committed to a player's recipe book. For higher tier crafting recipes, players will need to have acquired an artisan profession level high enough to be able to commit that specific recipe to their book. In some unique cases, recipes will have a limit, so they can only be crafted a finite amount of times before a player would need to acquire that recipe again. All recipes will have a set amount of required crafting materials, followed by a number of selectable crafting materials. These selectable materials will allow players to craft items with more individualized properties. This uncommon Nightblade was showcased in an Artisanship developer livestream and reveals to us a primary stat line of 15 physical damage and a secondary stat line of 10 magical penetration. An odd mix of physical and magical damage properties for a sword if you ask me, but when Steven adds the selectable zinc fragments at a legendary level, it changes the sword to a rare Nightblade. This reduces the primary physical damage stat line down to 10. But increases the secondary magical penetration stat to 13, and it also adds a tertiary stat of 12 magical damage. Then when Steven further adds legendary oak timber, it increases the Nightblade to a heroic status, and it increases all 3 stat lines. This Nightblade that started off as primarily a physical damage weapon in its uncommon form became a more magic damage oriented type of weapon in its heroic form based off of the selectable materials. Also, in this Artisanship livestream, the Ashes of Creation team talked about sub-recipes. Sub-recipes are unlocked by crafting a single recipe multiple times and building up experience. An example one of the developers mentioned was crafting a sub-recipe copper sword with ash timber instead of oak timber. And this ash timber would unlock a critical damage stat line as opposed to potentially a magical damage stat line that we saw oak timber unlock for the heroic Nightblade. This sub-recipe system would make crafting incredibly in-depth and possess a ton of potential. In my mind, I see a party of 8 players consisting of each archetype wielding a Nightblade. And through this sub-recipe system, each player's Nightblade could potentially have a stat line applicable to their individual archetype. But sub-recipes will not cover every possible stat line and will be somewhat limited on their predetermined selectable material options, so a cleric wielding a Nightblade would obviously not be an optimal weapon choice. All crafting will take place at crafting workbenches, which can be found in freeholds or nodes if proper prerequisite artisan buildings have been constructed. Freeholds will allow crafting up to a journeyman level, and nodes will allow the best crafting at the grandmaster level. Crafting at nodes can be further enhanced if players are citizens of a scientific node. Scientific nodes will have the ability to offer additional bonuses to crafting benches that other nodes will not have the luxury of. In the most recent AMA, it was clarified that any player can craft in any node, but to benefit from a specific node type bonus, players will need to be a citizen of that node. So that means citizens of a scientific node will have a leg up over all other players in the realm of crafting. A quality of life mechanic that everyone can rejoice in is that crafting will be able to automatically pull materials from a player's warehouse, as long as that warehouse is within the same node that the crafting is taking place. Currently, it is intended for crafted equipment to be best in slot, and the reason Steven stated for this is that he does not want the crafting system with all of its depth and intricacies that players will invest a lot of time into to be superseded or equaled by a much easier path of just participating in a raid boss or open world RNG drop chances. Ashes of Creation want crafters to have a unique stamp on the equipment they craft. A Discord message from Steven all the way back in 2017 stated that crafted equipment will have a tag that designates its creator. I think this is a very cool idea, and Intrepid Studios should actually take it a step further with giving a timestamp and node location to that crafted item. Let me explain why with a tale of Vladis. Let me take you on a journey into Vera. Young Ranger Dark Mitten makes his portal entry into Vera many decades after the first adventurers made theirs. As most adventurers do, he joins a guild called Overlords. Some friendly guildmates go through their warehouses and gift Dark Mitten a longbow of Briarhome. Upon inspecting his bow, he realizes that a man named Vladis crafted it in the Winstead node a few years after the portals opened. But now, Winstead is a barren land with little civilization. So this prompts our young ranger to check the library of his sprawling metropolis called Miraleth. He finds out that in the early years of the return to Vera, Vladis, the man who crafted his longbow, was the first mayor of Winstead and later advanced it to the first metropolis of the New World. But power eventually got the best of Vladis, and he became a tyrant who wanted all the riches that Vera had to offer. He waged war on all other nodes not under his vassalship, and he sent his hordes to pillage and steal. Vladis sat on a throne of all relics known from the old world before the calamity, and many compared him to that of King Atrax. This sparked a rebellion. The virtuous Dunir of Dunhold left the comforts of their mountain to lead this revolution. They rallied all of Vera together to end the tyranny of Vladis in what became known as the Great Siege of Winstead. Upon the destruction of everything Vladis worked so hard to build, the rest of Vera rejoiced. And through the rubble of Winstead, no one ever saw Vladis rise, nor was a body ever found. To this day, the mystery of Vladis remains, and his name is lost to time. Our ranger asks his guild if anyone knew Vladis or what might have happened to him. And from the depths of guild chat comes a deep, sultry voice of a man who fought in the Great Siege many years ago. They call him Nice. He utters, "I know that name." Maybe I got a bit carried away, but I think this illustrates some potential player-created lore that can occur just by simply adding those kind of details to crafted equipment, and furthermore, added value to items with a rich history that would allow players to become collectors of old crafted equipment from the early years of Vera. Let's move on and do a brief overview of the 8 crafting professions and what they will most likely entail. Just to be clear, there's not a lot of information about these professions quite yet, other than the fact that they will exist in Ashes of Creation. Arcane Engineering will most likely revolve around crafting staffs, wands, orbs, and spellbooks for all those essence-wielding magic users out there. There will also be runic power stones for enhancing equipment, like adding fire damage to a weapon or potentially fire resistances to armor. Arcane Engineering could be the method used to imbue weapons and armor with runic power stones, but more likely these power stones will act like consumables that any player could use at any time, like enchantment scrolls that we will talk about a little bit later. Armor smithing will probably be the method to crafting heavy armor for those tank and fighter archetypes. In a developer update, we saw that armor smithing had 2 different paths of offensive and defensive. I am not entirely sure what that could entail, because traditionally armor would just provide defensive stats. So my best guess is that offensive armor will provide stat bonuses for strength or dexterity, while defensive armor would provide an additional constitution stat bonus. Or that armor sets created through the offensive method gives a set bonus of additional physical damage, or additional physical and magical resistances if crafted through the defensive method. The carpentry crafting profession will obviously take part in creating cosmetic furniture for player housing and some other practical items like chests for storage and stovetops for cooking. An Ashes of Creation developer mentioned that weapons could be created through carpentry as well, so to me that sounds like wooden weapons like a bow. Furthermore, Carpentry will include crafting siege equipment and ship components. With those two things being true, I don't think it's so far-fetched that caravan pieces will be craftable through this profession as well. And lastly, I think artisan gathering tools make sense to fall under this category as well. So carpentry will have a lot of options. Jewel cutting will most likely be the way players craft jewelry. There are 5 slots for jewelry consisting of 2 earrings, 2 rings, and 1 necklace. Jewelry will offer vertical and horizontal power progression, which I assume will be primary attribute bonuses or damage resistances, whether that be physical, magical, or elemental specific. Leatherworking will be the method to crafting medium equipment for the DPS rogue and ranger archetypes. With armor smithing having offensive and defensive paths, it would make sense that leatherworking would have this option as well. With medium equipment traditionally being for DPS characters, it could make sense for certain players to forego the offensive route and instead craft defensive leather armor if they want to bridge the gap between DPS and tank if they chose their secondary archetype to be a tank. In addition to leather armor, I think all of the different types of resource bags for the gathering professions will be crafted under the leatherworking profession as well. Scribes will be able to craft freehold building blueprints that can give unique cosmetic looks to buildings, but can also provide additional benefits beyond cosmetics, like seen with the fishery blueprint that we discussed in our processing professions video. Different types of fisheries will produce different types of fish, which certain fish could be applicable to certain cooking recipes. Scribes will also be able to create enchantment scrolls to enhance player equipment. Steven takes some influence in his systems from Lineage 2, so I will describe how enchanting worked in Lineage because it seems Steven is taking that route based off of these quotes. Weapon and armor enchanting allowed for safe enchanting up to +3 or +4 with a 100% chance success rate. Every enchantment beyond this safe zone would be a gamble, and in the result of a failure, your equipment would be destroyed, yielding a portion of the original equipment's value in crafting materials. I also believe armor set bonuses were enhanced if all pieces of equipment reach a certain threshold of enchantment. There was also blessed scrolls of enchantment, which were much more expensive, but in the event of a failed enchantment, the equipment pieces would get reset to +0 instead of getting destroyed. If enchanting works this way in Ashes of Creation, then there will always be a need for enchantment scrolls, with how difficult it would be to reach a maximum enchanted weapon and armor set with there being 8 total pieces. Not to mention the 5 jewelry slots and potentially 3 artisan gear slots if those can be enchanted as well. Players will be pouring gold into these enchantment scrolls, so I honestly think that scribing will be the best money-making artisan profession out of all 22. Tailoring, I assume, will be the method to craft light equipment for our remaining 4 archetypes: Mage, Cleric, Summoner, and Bard. I also assume there will be offensive and defensive options like we saw with armor smithing to help players get creative when they choose their secondary archetype and want a more unique playstyle. Players will also have a cape slot for their equipment that I think may just be for cosmetic purposes instead of providing defensive stats, but either way, it makes sense to me that crafting capes would fall under the tailoring profession. Weaponsmithing will be the means of crafting all non-magical weapons, apart from possibly the bow that we discussed could be in the carpentry crafting profession, and also shields currently fall under the weaponsmithing category as well. Weaponsmithing will also have specializations into piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning weapon types. As a smithy gets upgraded, it will need to choose a specialization path, so multiple smithies will need to be constructed to unlock all of the Grandmaster weapon crafting options. We are now nearing the end of our crafting conclusions video, and I want to ask all of you a few questions before I go. Of all 22 artisan professions, which are you most excited for in the upcoming Alpha 2 or for the eventual full release of the game? Which professions do you think will have the most synergy with each other from gathering to processing to crafting? And which professions do you think will generate the most gold? I plan on making more videos about artisan professions revolving around these questions when we get to see them in action later this year during Alpha 2. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.